Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be reacting to a video called History Summarized Wales. It's raining cats and dogs, as I'm sure you can hear, but I am very excited to learn the actual history of this country because I know that some people, and me included, I think because it's located in Great Britain, which I know it's the name of the island, but because it's this, England is probably the most recognizable country in that whole island. I think people tend to sometimes group them all together and call them, oh, they're British. But no, I know that Wales is a different country, so I'm very excited to learn the differences and what the actual history of Wales is because I know it's separate from England. So let's check it out and comment, like, and subscribe.
The history of the British Isles is an uneven affair, to put it mildly. We're familiar with how Scotland and Ireland drew the imperial short stick and enjoyed the pleasure of being sat upon by England, but perhaps the
that's kind of rude to say. They got the short end of the stick. I think that's a little rude for them.
shortest stick of the bunch was drawn by Wales, who was often left out of the discussion entirely. And while I'm shocked that anybody could gloss over the country that is a freaking dragon flag, Wales has been tragically sidelined from the historical narrative.
Okay, yeah, I never actually thought of this. Yeah, it's true. It's a dragon. How come it's a dragon? Dragons they're not real. How come they're in the flag?
Of the Isles, and I will not stand for it. Wales has impressively and improbably maintained a distinct Celtic culture since the very start, and it is far too cool.
Oh yeah, that's like the language Welsh. I think it's pretty. It sounds kind of weird. I like it, but it sounds a little weird, and I think it is what Celtics used to speak, or very similar. I don't know if it was the same language or pretty similar, so it makes sense because it sounds very elfish in a way. I know it's a cliche. I know they're not elves, but they kind of sound like that a little.
Cool for historians to be doing them dirty like that. So, to see how Wales did the hard carry for Great Britain's culture for 2,000 straight years, let's do some history.
Wow,
a proper understanding of this whole Wales business requires us to go way back in British history. No, too far. Yeah, there we go. See, Celtic culture in Britain is the foundation of what will eventually become Wales, but these guys aren't the easiest to get a handle on. The Celtic, or Gallic people, stretched out from Central Europe towards Gaul, Iberia, and the British Isles, but also went...
This is crazy when I look at the map and I see all these ancient civilizations and people, and groups of people. They spanned, this is what, over Asia as well. This is crazy. It's all throughout Europe, Central Europe, all the way to the east, west, northern, south. They are so far away. They are literally in Asia. And then, of course, super up north. It's insane. They occupied so much territory.
Southeast towards the Black Sea, and one problem for us loser historians is that it's unclear how and even kinda if they settled in Britain. There are competing theories for who, when, where, and why, ranging from the standard migration models to the possibility that very few Celts actually settled in Britain. Logic being...
Okay, so that's weird, because then how come it left such an imprint on their culture if few people actually migrated there? I think it's crazy, and the fact that historians apparently cannot decide, I think that's even crazier. Well, maybe it's because obviously they don't have the evidence.
That overseas trade was key to the Bronze Age economy, and Britain's tin deposits made them a big export hub. Since tin is half the chemical structure for bronze, that meant people from all over Europe and the Mediterranean came to the Atlantic coasts to get their bronze on, and this includes our Celt boys. So it wasn't mass migration that brought Celtic people to Britain, but rather local Britons who buddied up with Celtic traders by speaking their language and copying their swirly
It was an economic advantage.
Latin art. So according to this meme model, the local Britons thought Celtic culture was LOL so relatable XD that they adopted it all up and down the Isles. Whether or not this model is fully accurate, it would account for some weird archaeological and linguistic discrepancies in the traditional migration theory. And it also foreshadows the prestige placed on bards and literary
Okay, yeah, because apparently they're in the Gaelic language family. That makes sense. Gaelic as in the Gaelish language. Yeah, it's older. They're similar, but not the same. So yeah, I know there's a bunch of different kind of things, but it's probably because they don't have enough evidence to go to make sure and to prove. Oh yeah, it's one way or it would happen like this. So well, who knows?
established by later Celtic cultures, because it's equal parts cool as all hell and existentially horrifying
Yeah.
that a culture can basically by itself take hold of an entire population by willing itself into existence. This would be our
Awful, but it wouldn't be the first time something like this has happened, so sure.
first indication that Wales has big eldritch energy. Other civilizations, however, would not follow this lead because the Romans found that culture was best delivered by spear point. While on their way to fill out their pan-imperial punch card and get their 10th new province free, Roman emperors in the mid-1st century campaigned into Britain. Most Roman settlements were in the south and east, where all the easy agriculture was, and although goods, coins, and Roman legions did make their way west, the cultural and linguistic impact on so-called Britannia Secunda was only slight. Perhaps the
Yeah, it makes sense because they were only trading, so people weren't settling there. They had their own culture, so of course we're not absorbing your culture. We have our own thing.
most transformative thing the Romans did in Wales was leave, because the post-Roman migrations from Central Europe into Britain totally upended the island's demographics. Frustratingly,
Okay, so yeah, good. They withheld that part of their identity, which I think is great.
it's nigh impossible to show this kind of thing clearly on a map, which is why turbulent centuries in history with slim documentation make blue a sad boy, but here's the gist. We know the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes from northern Europe arrived and displaced many of the Romano-Britons, but over in the west there was also an influx of Irish Celts coming in to settle. This age of migrations was much more overtly migratory than the Celtic arrival in Britain in the millennium before, though, again, the native
Millennium.
Britons didn't really leave. After a few decades of raiding gave way to much more peaceable settlement, most Britons were happy to start speaking Germanic and make friends with their new Saxon neighbors than to up and book it for the hills. Still, the
Okay.
end result was the confinement of
Yeah, probably. I think you're just tired of fighting, and you're probably, you know what? I like this land. What do you want me to do? Sure, whatever. We'll speak a different language from now on. Who cares? I care about the land, so that's the most important part.
native Celtic culture to the far west in Wales and Cornwall. And that split explains why it's called Wales. It comes from the Germanic word wala, meaning foreigner, while the Welsh call it cymri, from the Celtic word for countryman. It's also in this migratory shuffle that the legend of the Romano
Seeing where the words come from, I think that's insane, but it makes all the sense in the world if you actually stop and think about this for a second. It's, oh yeah, of course. How come I didn't thought of this before?
British King Arthur first pops up, though it'll be a couple centuries before he's labeled as Arthur or a king. Honestly, the whole early medieval period in Wales has this pseudo-mythic Age of Heroes vibe to it. Good documentation is blah, what else is new, but the oral traditions that will later become the core of Welsh epic literature get their start in this era. So,
Okay, so what it means, if maybe it's not, who knows if it actually happened the way that we were being taught it happened. Which I know probably people were taking artistic license just because it makes for an interesting story, and it didn't exactly happen in the way that I'm telling you about this. But I'm embellishing the story because, well, I'm telling you a story, so I want it to be exciting.
as far as we can tell, what was going on in medieval Wales? Well, isolation from Germanic majority England was good for preserving a unified Celtic
Yeah.
culture, but the politics were much more wibbly.
Okay, it represents, what I'm getting is the red dragon represents the Welsh Celtic people and the Saxons. Okay, the white dragons, they were identified. I don't really know, because obviously for them they were still mythical creatures. They weren't thinking, oh, dragons exist, or maybe they did. Maybe they thought this creature must exist somewhere else. So maybe they just got them confused with some other animal. Maybe, I don't know what kind of animal you can get. I'm trying to think. No, I don't think there's an animal you can confuse with a dragon, but this is 1,000 years ago, so who knows? I don't know what animal was maybe not enough involved. It wasn't, evolution wasn't how it is today, so who knows? But I think it's interesting that it's the dragon. How come it's the dragon? What?
Various local princes vied for hegemony over the many disparate realms, but succession always proved their undoing, as sons would squabble and big kingdoms would shrink
Oh.
back to where they started. The
Well, that's
princes
bad.
of Gwynedd and Powys were the most successful of the bunch, and as a result, King Offa of Mercia built a dike across his border in the late 700s to try and keep Powys out. But that worked
Sure.
about as well as any frontier walls have worked throughout history, which
No-
is to say,
Yeah.
And a northern Category 4 broke through the coastal wall in less than an hour.
Yeah.
barely. So despite the best attempts of Saxon kings and the Irish Sea, Wales wasn't entirely cut off from the rest of the world, as they had gotten on board with
And I think it's harder just because, yes, obviously walls you can break down the wall. But also I think because it's an island, and yes, of course, they're kind of isolated already. But the fact that it's in the same sort of territory, it makes it hard to be isolated just because it's land, so you can just sort of cross over, and again, you can pass a wall. So it's not as if it's an island. I think it's easier to just maintain your isolation if you're sort of separate from everything else.
Christianity thanks to the missionary Saint David back in the 6th century. They might not have been the most consistent of pen pals with the Pope in Rome, but they were mostly on the same page. Wales' early medieval history of relative chill was aided by...
That's already, I think to me, if it maintained throughout the years, I think that's a big difference, because I know that in England they had a big fight. They're not super Catholic over there, so that's a big difference.
England's near constant Viking tire fire, which pushed Conquer Wales way down the to-do list. But that changed when our old pals the Normans kite-shielded their way to conquering England, because suddenly this new Norman England had a much stronger army, and they proceeded to point it right at Wales. Norman lords pushed into Wales along the northern and southern coasts and made some, but not a lot of progress. Since Wales was made of small principalities, the Normans could play the Welsh off each other, but then all of their gains were only incremental. Not so easy as winning Hastings and calling it a day. While casual war was the standard for the next 200 years along the borderland marches, elements of England...
It's crazy. A war that lasts 200 years. I know that it's the 100 years war, but still, 200 years, that's a long time to be fighting.
Norman and Welsh culture made their way across. The princes of Gwynedd, Powys, and Deheubarth picked up some Norman political structures, and England learned about Welsh longbows the hard way. Although Wales didn't form into a unified nation, they did get close a couple times. Llewellyn Var fought off his family members to become Prince of Gwynedd and proceeded to bap all of his enemies out of the way, so...
Well, yeah, it's not... I was about to say, you're fighting with your family? No, but of course, if you're in the royal family, your brothers, your siblings are the ones that you should be fighting, because you're all competing for the same thing. You're competing for the throne. So yeah, of course, it makes sense. You're fighting against your own family, your uncles, your aunts, I don't know.
So that he could assert his hegemony over Wales. He also tried to streamline the rules for royal succession so that every interregnum didn't immediately explode into a civil war. He then pushed eastward into the March and defeated King John of England so handily that his barons made him sign the Magna Carta to stop being such a royal knob. Llewellyn's military successes weren't quite matched by his grandson, also Llewellyn. Though he did the biggest prince in Wales routine again, he was defeated by England's King Edward Longshanks. The next year, in 1283, Edward pushed into Wales and stomped out the princes, using the old Norman trick of building a buttload of castles in newly conquered territory to stop the locals from getting ideas. In a twist that should surprise...
I'm wondering how long did it took them to build the castles, because I don't think this springs up from one morning to the other. I think it takes you a month, or if not years, to build these huge structures.
No one, England needed more than a few of these to do the trick, so Wales has the highest castle density of any country in Europe, with over 600 built and 100 still standing today. That's
a huge amount to be still standing. It was the year 200,000. I think that's crazy, just because it's been so long, and the fact that they're still sort of, you still have a lot of them, which I find incredibly, I mean, that's fantastic, but wow, it's kind of incredible. And also, I like, now it's a touristy attraction, but no, the actual history behind them. Why they have so many castles? Well, not so good.
That is, and I really cannot stress this enough, a stupid amount of castles. That's the density equivalent of 23 castles in New York City, with a less impressive but still formidable 2 castles just in Manhattan. Good lord!
Yeah, but still, it's a lot.
In any case, the post-conquest period was a weird century for Wales. Suddenly they were subordinate to England, but soon they got tied up in the 100 Years' War, and then everybody had plague to contend with. So while it was a real wacky time,
I think you tend to complain about, modern times are hard, but wow, these people really had it rough. You got into 200 Years' War, then the king was defeated, you were conquered, then you got into 100 Years' War with another country, and on top of that, you have the plague. It's, oh my god, this one thing after another, right?
It was also surprisingly indicative of the history still to come, as England goes about its business while holding a pillow over Wales' face, gently shushing them and hoping nobody notices. Forgive me for speedrunning through the next several centuries, but I've already done the England plotline once, and that was painful enough. A century after a thwarted independence uprising in 1400, Wales had the good fortune to pull a reverso and put a Welshman on the English throne. The man in question was one Henry VII, notable ender of the War of the Roses, and he set up Wales for greater integration with England and way more rights than they had had before. This all became official via the Laws in Wales Act passed by Henry VIII in the mid-1500s. He drew up county borders, standardized laws, gave Welshmen equal status as Englishmen, and gave Wales representation in Parliament. And as an added bonus of
It's crazy that they didn't have representation in the parliament because they were a territory. So how come they well, yeah, of course they wanted to step on them, but it's still, that's crazy.
Henry's hop over to Protestantism, the church translated the Bible into Welsh. This protection of the Welsh language coincided with a new interest in medieval culture and ancient literature, and language became a defining feature of the Welsh identity. While
Yeah, because it's the one thing that they can't take away from you.
all of this was going on, the political story of Wales got folded into the larger English narrative, what with the Spanish Armada-ing, the union of the crowns of England and Scotland-ing, and the creation of a globe-spanning empire.
See, there's always one thing happening.
Despite playing second fiddle, maybe closer to fourth, in the history of the British Empire, Welsh literature was rising in prominence during the Romantic movement, thanks in part to some shiny new editions of classic works. Specifically, Lady Charlotte Guest compiled and published the 4 branches of the Mabinogi, and doubly
What's that?
translated too, so Welsh and English readers could both enjoy the medieval folklore. In contrast
No,
to
that
Scots
book.
Gaelic going kaput and Irish Gaelic suffering a steep decline in the 1800s that they're only recently bouncing back from, Welsh literature and poetry came in
Well, but the fact that still it's alive and you're trying to keep it alive, even in this modern times, I think it's incredible. It's a really great feat.
clutch for the long-term endurance of the language. But while the Romantic era was in full swing, so too was the Industrial Revolution. So all these fancy new machines and choo-choo trains needed coal if they wanted to do anything,
Yeah.
and Wales happens to have a crap ton of the stuff.
Oh.
Southern Wales swiftly became the mining capital of the empire, and while coal and slate may have been big business, they were also hellish jobs to work. So
Yeah.
Wales ended the century more urban.
Yeah, I'm not sure how the coal mining business worked back in those days, but I can bet it wasn't a good job to have. It must have been awful.
Than it had ever been, but the Welsh probably weren't so thrilled about why, especially as British attitudes towards them soured and Wales got the dingy reputation shared by all other regions doing heavy industry. Although the 1900s started out pretty
So they were seen probably as lower class, I would imagine. They were seen as sort of lesser than the British, probably.
rough, what with the coal mining and a nasty spell of discrimination against the Welsh language in schools and work, Wales turned a corner after the Second World War. Industry diversified and politicians campaigned for more regional autonomy and protections for the language. The Welsh Language Acts of 1967 and 93 elevated Welsh to on par with English, granting bilingual signage, the right to use Welsh in legal proceedings, and Welsh language broadcasting. So now
Love
a
it.
third of Wales can speak the native language. And
That's a
in
lot.
1999,
How many people are there in Wales?
Wales, and also Scotland, but that's a different story, got its own national assembly, later promoted to parliament. And
they
that's
should.
Wales. Far too often sidelined in the history of the Isles, Wales has an enchanting historical vibe the other 3 countries lack. Maybe it's the ancient Celtic
Yeah.
language and the dragon flag getting to me, but Wales feels older, like you can wander slightly too far up a hiking trail and stumble into Narnia. As anybody who knows Welsh can confirm, it just sounds like the language dragons would speak. And
Yeah, it's not, I was going to say a made up language, but all the languages are made up technically. But yeah, it sounds fantastical in a way that, well, I don't know, it sounds like fantasy.
I know better than to disrespect the Dragon Lords. Thank you so much for watching. If you want more overly sarcastic content beamed into your cerebellum, then please consider listening to the OS Podcast. We've got a link down below for you to subscribe, and if you don't have a favorite podcasting app, you can just listen in your browser and pretend like it's a YouTube video with no video. In any case, I'll see you all in the next video.
Okay, I loved it. I feel like I learned a lot about it. I think it's kind of unfair just looking at the whole history and how, and probably it's kind of bad. I think they're being, again, they're sort of they're seen as lesser than England, and obviously that's really bad. But seeing it like this, I think, wow, the obviously they have a lot of things in common. Clearly, yes, they're right next to England. They're in the same place. But just looking at it like that, I think I can see why it's so offensive. I think for someone to call a Welsh person, oh, you're English. No, of course not. And just seeing it like this, I think their histories are connected. Of course, it's hard not to. Of course, they work together, and they are technically, they are part of the whole thing. However, they are so incredibly different, and the history, yes, of course, again, it's connected because it's unavoidable. But how, again, the culture, the roots, and everything that involves, and how Welsh identity, I think, was probably formed, it's very different and very distinct from the English and just the British. I think not British. I think it's English identity. It's I don't know why you get them confused. Oh yeah, I don't think I'll ever make that mistake again, just because it's very different. I think if they weren't so close together, and if, well, yes, it's kind of, if my grandma had wheels, she would have been a bicycle. Yeah, I know there's a lot of factors that you kind of take into account to, oh, but this would be different. Yeah, but what I mean, it's kind of impossible to imagine, obviously, a history of Wales without the English sort of influence and without the England, the country. But if they weren't, just taking an exercise in giant imagination, taking leaps and bounds in imagination, if they weren't so close together, I think you wouldn't consider them that close, and you wouldn't consider them to be the same thing, although obviously, again, it's not the same thing, because they're very different. And obviously that's taking out the whole, oh yeah, we were conquered by these people. And obviously there's a lot of friction there because, again, they were conquered and they were trying to make them, I don't think make them disappear, but as a way, yes, because England was trying to make the Welsh culture disappear, because that's what conquering means. Of course, they wanted to, well, no, you're part of us. And I think it's incredible. It's a great feat that even if it happened again, I think around 1,000 years ago, they are still able to maintain their own identity, their own country, their own language. I think that's incredible, because it's not easy. A lot of cultures can definitely they can say that it's no, we were conquered, and of course a few little things remain from it, because it's very easy to sort of succumb to this great powerful force that's trying to put you down. So it speaks a lot about resilience and a lot about how Welsh people are and have been throughout history. They have been very strong, and of course their cultural identity means a lot to them, which I think, yes, of course it should, but I really love the fact that it's so tied, that their history and their culture is so tied with their own language. I love it, and it's a way of, yeah, it's a way of resistance. I think the fact that they were trying to get rid of your language, and like we've seen, yeah, they almost succeeded doing this with the Irish Gaelic, and I think the Scottish Gaelic as well. I think the Scottish one is probably the one that disappeared. I think apparently the Irish it's making a comeback, but it almost disappeared as well. Because yes, it is very hard to maintain this throughout so many years. So it's incredible that Wales, no, they managed to do this. And again, I like the fact that it's a symbol of resistance. It's kind of beautiful as well, because, and it sounds maybe a little bit silly, but yes, it's speaking, I think, Welsh, and seeing all those signs, all the road signs, and apparently, yes, they also have, I think, broadcasting. They broadcast the TV in Welsh. I think, again, it's an act of resistance, of saying, hey, no, you're trying to erase us, but no, we're still here, and we're still standing, we're still here, and we're going to continue. So I love that, and I think, yeah, it's kind of sad that more countries aren't able to say that. Wales should be incredibly proud of themselves, the fact that they've managed to do this, and to the point where it is. And what did they say? A third of the population speaks Welsh. So it's less likely for you to go to Wales and not find someone that speaks Welsh. And I'm gonna guess that even if people do not speak it completely, they're not super fluent in this, just the fact that the roads are in Welsh, and probably a lot of the names, I think, are the names of the cities and places, are probably in Welsh. So I think it's a lot of people just sort of, oh, well, I don't speak it, but I know what certain words mean, and obviously, I know how to pronounce it. I know certain words because of the fact that I'm Welsh and sort of living here. I am going to absorb this. So even though if I can't communicate a whole conversation in Welsh, at least I have the basics. And I think that's incredible, and that's so nice. I love the dragon situation. I think I would have loved a little more explanation on this, just because it represented it represents the people, but why a dragon? I think it's really weird because again it doesn't really exist. It's kind of weird to say, yes, I am being represented by this creature that only exists in fantasy and in my mind. Obviously super cool, yes, of course, but I am wondering what the thought process was like. Did they thought they saw a dragon? They were, oh yeah, I'm being represented by a dragon because I think, maybe it comes from a legend or something. Oh, we were there and we were in a battle and we saw a dragon and we won. But it wasn't a dragon, it was an eagle. I don't know. I'm trying to think of animals that resemble dragons. I'm coming up a little short, but I would love to know how the legend goes of them being felt and seen by this dragon, mythical creature. Obviously, today in this day and age, super cool. Yes, obviously back in the day, maybe as well. I don't know what the English national animal is. I have no idea. It's not as cool as a dragon, I bet, because there's the fact that you have a mythological creature that doesn't really exist, but it's incredibly cool, and I think it's dangerous because I think, dragons. I don't think they're seen as dangerous, although, kind of crazy to think about this as if they were real. But I think they're you see a dragon and it invokes power, it invokes intimidation. You're standing in front of this amazing creature, this fantastic and majestic creature. So of course they're being seen and they want to be seen as that, which yes, of course I like. But again, it's how come I'm down with it, but how come you guys think they're dragons? They thought they were real. I don't know. But I want to know as well, if especially with the whole language thing, do they teach Welsh in schools? How have they managed to preserve this language? Because yes, they were talking about how it got translated. A lot of works they got translated in both English and Welsh. And of course, that it's good because it preserves the language in one particular in literature. Yeah, of course, it's important. But in the collective sort of consciousness, I think to make people sort of speak this language is not enough to just, we're translated the books. Or we're just putting the names of stuff in this. I mean, that helps, yes. And the names of the places. And obviously this probably it was a recent thing. I think it was in the 1960s. But before that, do the people just got taught Welsh in school in this modern times? Is this still being taught, or you kind of have to either learn or your own, or your family speaks Welsh at home and that's why you kind of grow up speaking it and that's how you get fluent? I don't know. I would love to know how the typical sort of Welsh family and Welsh individuals live their lives. Do they speak English? When you're walking on the street, do people speak English, not just with tourists, but between them? And also between families as well. In between families, they speak Welsh, or do they speak English? For instance, at home with their friends and their families. I think that's very interesting because again, maybe, and it makes me wonder. I don't really know. I'm not sure, but if the government in maybe created a whole campaign at some point in history to preserve this. So maybe there was a lot of emphasis and people learning this, and yes, maybe even the broadcast TV. Maybe there were I don't know, shows that taught you Welsh. I don't know, but I'd be very intrigued to find out if there was some effort on the government's part to kind of teach the individuals about this language. Although I think a lot of them, and obviously you're trying to preserve your own language. I think it comes from just cultural identity, I would assume as well. Because if your great grandparents were trying to maintain their own culture, it makes sense to me that they were going to teach their kids that. So that's how your grandparents learned it, and then your grandparents taught your parents, and your parents taught you. But it's more of a thing of you feel. I don't know. It's not. It's kind of a loaded word, but I would say it's more like adapt, and people maybe feel indebted, and I'm going to teach my kids this. Because again, it's part of our culture, it's part of our identity, and as well, it's resilience, and we're there. It shows that they were trying to erase us and have been trying to erase us and tried a bunch of times, but no, we're still here as a culture. So I really love it, and yes, I would love to learn Welsh because, like they said, it sounds kind of weird. It sounds it sounds like a fantasy language in a way, which I know is very whimsical, and it reminds me of elves and fairies, which probably is not really, of course it's not, but I think it just reminds me a little bit of that. But I think it's just, it goes with the landscape, and it's all this mysterious place, and all the castles and all the ancient stuff that I think it really does. I think it will be a magical place. I've never been to Wales, but I think, again, from what I've seen and the vibes, it's very, oh yeah, I feel like I just got into this fantasy book, or this fairy tale, and I found this, and everyone speaks another language that sounds really weird and fantastical at the same time, and there's dragons everywhere. I don't know. I would love to visit Wales just because, no, it sounds like a beautiful place. But that was it for today, and I'll see you soon. Bye!